This is Changeling the podcast. Welcome to Changeling the podcast, where everything's made up and the pledges don't matter. I'm your host Puka, and I am joined by Fetch. Hello, Fetch.
Hi, but whose Fetch am I?
Pick a random NPC from the two supplements that we're about to read through, but like a favorite one, probably.
A favorite one. Okay. I have a character in mind.
Okay. Are you going to keep it secret, or? You probably should keep it secret. It is generally wise, I would say, for a fetch not to disclose for whom they are the fetch.
It doesn't always work out that way, but I think I can at least make it through the episode before facing the consequences of the Vengeful Fae.
No. Well, until then, we are here to discuss the Fearmaker's Promise compilation.
Heck yeah, I'm excited about this one. It really went up in the rankings after I literally ran the two adventures in it.
Which we will get to. I have questions.
I have answers and not the ones I expected to give.
Oh. So this is actually three supplements combined into one, kind of. There's the Fearmaker's Promise, which was released in October 2007, near the start of the line, actually, as the first downloadable SAS story kit for Changeling the Lost. Technically, it was before even Autumn Nightmares, so really early. Then the Rose Bride's Plight, which was released in October 2008 after Equinox Road. And then the final piece we have here is Personae, a set of ready-made characters that came out after Swords at Dawn and before Goblin Markets. But all of these were combined into this single compilation book in 2011, nearly 2 full years after Goblin Markets. So, kind of like we talked about before, by this point White Wolf was pretty much defunct under the auspices of CCP. And this compilation, I think, did get a proper print run because it has like a White Wolf product code and ISBN. But after this, we're solidly in the Onyx Path era and winding down the first edition of the game.
I wonder if that has something to do with a general issue I have with the book. That while they have combined these materials, they have taken no pains to consolidate them. So you get two separate explanations of what an SAS is. The second chapter points you back to page numbers that only make sense if it was to the standalone product. And there's no advice on integrating the ready-made characters into the adventures. What do you think? Do you think that was just them going, that makes sense? Or do you think they had some sort of pressure on them to get it out quick and easy?
I can't imagine that there was any kind of pressure like that because, honestly, I was so far out of RPGs at the time that I don't even really remember the context for the release. I can't quite remember when I even bought it. I saw it on a shelf at some point and thought, oh yeah, I should buy this. But yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway.
No worries. Let's just move on to the main story then. Do we want to just jump into the first of the entries?
Well, before getting into it, I want to actually address a question from the Discord first, which was asking about the difference between Storytelling Adventure System, or SAS products, and other forms of prepackaged chronicle material. And we discussed that a bit with, what was it?
Goblin Markets.
Goblin Markets. And I think you pointed out, from your perspective, that SAS and New World of Darkness / Chronicles of Darkness as a whole were designed to be sandboxy to a degree that Old World of Darkness products maybe weren't. And I've thought about that a little bit more since we discussed Goblin Markets. My own feeling on the one hand, when I compare the two types of module, it's true that the Old World of Darkness tended to be grounded in deep lore to a degree that can make them feel railroady or confusing if you're not familiar with it. And I know the sort of quintessential example people point to is Transylvania Chronicles for Vampire, where you are watching the meta plot unfold, essentially. And even though you are player characters moving and shaking among Sasha Vikos and, Augustus Giovanni, whoever, you don't actually get to change any of the lore unless the storyteller allows it. The books as written everything still unfolds as it does. On the other hand, for some people, that may give them a feeling of engaging with a shared world that is maybe more difficult to swing in the largely setting-like Chronicles of Darkness books. And even if, like me, you don't really care to engage with metaplot and the deep lore in your own game, it still makes a lush backdrop that you as the storyteller don't have to plan as deeply. So that was like one thing I was thinking about. I don't know if you have more thoughts about SAS, but
I want to dig into that statement you just made. So are you saying that people would get what they want out of the Transylvania Chronicle, for example, just by reading it?
I think yes. And also, some people will get what they need out of it if they're a certain kind of storyteller. I think if you're a storyteller who just follows the letter of the book, you may not get as much out of it, and your players, importantly, may not get as much out of it as they could. So, having a discussion with players around what the purpose of running that story is probably would be helpful.
It strikes me that if their goal with this was to capture those two markets, it makes more sense to me that you would just make that into a piece of fiction for people to
Mm.
read. Maybe annotate it with, hey, appendix, if you want to make this an adventure, you could do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know if they entirely learned that lesson. I think we kind of see a spectrum from chronicle books presented as chronicle books and tie-in fiction on the other end. And there's some stuff that kind of lives in the mushy middle. I look at something like Immortalize and the early Changeling first edition Dreaming stuff where there were novels, but then there were also these setting/storybooks, so things like that. And I think that, like I said last time, every role playing book to me offers tools for building a chronicle. So I wasn't very taken for the way they presented Goblin Markets as being lightly SAS, because that golden rule of change what you want, in my opinion, it allows every book to become a sandbox. So maybe SAS is better to open it up and run it immediately out of the package. I think it still does come down to personal storytelling style, what you want to emphasize, and the willingness to put in the effort to remix and rebuild. But what I do find frustrating is when people insist that one way or another is better without qualification. It's like, why do we have to have these struggles? Just people talk to your players, do what you all agree is best for your table.
The biggest concern I can think of while reading through these, and were I to ever look at those previous books, is how well they stand on their own.
Mm.
While the Golden Rule is helpful, at some point, I've Golden Ruled away all of the support structures for me as a storyteller, at which point it would have been better to just have a story hook and then for the storyteller to drop things in.
Mm.
I don't mean for me specifically, I mean in aggregate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that too. I suppose any book, certainly when I was reading through this one, I was looking for worthwhile material writ large, like structurally, and thinking, how could I use this skeleton for any further ideas that I might have for running a chronicle? Because to me, that's the storyteller's responsibility when just casually reading through any kind of, well, really any book, let alone any chronicle book. Look for what you can use to give players the best experience, because these techniques or technologies of role playing that make you go, oh, I'll have to try using that. Like, take note of that, whether it's from a Chronicles book or an Old World of Darkness book or Changeling or Mage or whatever. We have all these different authors drawing on their experiences and ideas to present what they hope will be a functioning chronicle. And yeah, I don't know.
That I can stand by. The idea that even if it's not right for you, nothing stops you from reading it for good ideas.
Yeah. And to circle back to the original question, I think there are modules in the world that are less rateable than others overall. I think across the board, World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness, even if there's some variation within that realm, they are by and large better than, for example, when I look at certain old D&D supplements where it's really like a checklist of steps. And I've played with people who run them like a checklist of steps, and it is so boring. So
I don't know how somebody could bring themselves to do that or to play in it?
Well, I think it really comes down to if you create a dungeon and you make a list of monsters and you make a list of traps and you make a list of treasures and it's all very get through this, now get through this, there is an element of pro forma gaming that goes into that. So having some kind of emphasis on the story is what matters.
I'm reminded of a situation where I did do something like that, but it was intentionally a farce between me and the players. I had the book that has all the older modules put into 5e, Tales from the Yawning Portal,
Oh,
that's
okay.
the one. I was excited for the book, read it, and realized I could not run any of these without ruining friendships. They are by and large terrible with some exceptions. But me and the group were totally okay to play it straight, but also to make light of things like me withholding absurd amounts of information because they didn't specify that they were looking at the vase with the blue rose inside of it, or telling them, okay, your characters all die from the rock slide that happens, no saves. Anyway, just produce some new characters. We had a good time. We laughed at the modules. We cut out the part about going into the ogre keep and doing terrible things that really did not age well, aren't funny, and shouldn't have been there in the first place.
And that's D&D for you. Well, no, I take that
That's
back.
D&D.
That's some D&D. Journeys through the Radiant Citadel is beautiful and perfect. But yeah, some D&D is not great. Anyway, anything else about SAS in particular that feels different? Because I'm not convinced it is that different. Like I said last time, I don't think it's really as novel as they're trying to present it as, but yeah.
Here's where I think it makes some difference. Theoretically, the framing of all the scenes with how challenging they're going to be in different arenas helps you prepare for things. And the ease of integrating them into existing material, which is all you could do with the Goblin Market stuff, or using them as part of a bigger setting, such as with the ones we're about to talk today, I think that's worth calling out as unusual for adventures, most of which I see are insistently a path that's going to take some number of hours of your life with little variation of it or guidance of integrating it into other things. For example, Pathfinder 2e, the beginner box, there's some issues with the adventure, but it's overall good. And I think they give like a hint or two at how you could more largely integrate it, but it doesn't give me much support. That said, I do feel like, even as I'm saying this, that I am stretching it to give the SAS some credit. It's more likely that it was just a cool term that they wanted to use for some things that were not necessarily a quick start to a beginning of a campaign, as opposed to the jump starts, which seem like they're made for freshly made characters.
Well, that being said, let's get into the first one, because The Fearmaker's Promise by Chuck Wendig, it does say on the front it's intended for characters from 0 to 34 XP, so presumably this could be a starting player adventure, the way it's structured here.
The adventure did work fantastically well with the 4 players that I had for that one. And the Rosebud worked great for the 3 that I had in that one as well. People in the Fearmaker's Promise, they didn't have any XP, but they also didn't have extraordinarily difficulty getting through the scenario itself.
Despite the 3 dots each of mental, physical, and social challenge that the cover also indicates. So
nope, they did some really interesting things that curtailed the various challenges, and that was fair.
So getting into it. All right. Content warnings. You put together the list, so I'm going to let you read out the list of content warnings for this adventure.
Oh, good. I did safety sheets for each of them. The idea behind a safety sheet is that it's lines and veils, but we have a central document for everybody to look at. In addition to marking something as a line or a veil, people can put down ask first for stuff they want flagged before it enters, or interest if it's something that they are all in about. I have some general content warnings that I use for any game that I run, and then I add in specific ones for a game line or an adventure. So, going down the list of things that are noteworthy, body horror. There are some disturbing looking characters in this situation. A child endangerment. Not to bury the lead, this is indeed the big one. The premise of the adventure is that a stranger to the courts has promised to perform a contract that will keep children in the freehold safe for a year and a day. However, it requires that a child be tortured for the evening to empower the ritual. Depending upon players' actions, you could see the entire ritual play itself out, or even have your characters participating in that. That is decidedly not the route that my group went with or had any interest in, but the idea of child endangerment as a theme was something else for them. They were actually intrigued by that on the safety sheet because the adventure makes an attempt at showing all the different moral angles on this, and the players were fascinated to see a morality play unfold. They decided that they wanted to go down the road of saving the kid, which is great because that's the one that I was way more interested in playing out. And after the session, I asked them, would you have played in a game of this if the other three players had said they were interested in helping the ritual to its conclusion? And 2 of 1, every one of them said, that is not the way I would want to play it, but if that was the way everyone else was going, I would still participate in that session. I would, however, make a very different character. So it turns out that is a topic that was worth discussing, but did not shut things off from the table entirely.
Regardless of what the players decide, the child endangerment and torture piece is like central to the story. So it's, regardless of what players choose to do, it's unavoidable.
Correct. It would have been a much more challenging conversation if they liked everything except for the child endangerment.
Yeah. So if it's a hard line for people, then this is not for you.
Yes. I have some other ones, but honestly, that is the biggest one. Most of the others are general stuff for this game or for Changeling in general.
I would throw in gaslighting. I would throw in the psychological.
I do have that one on there.
Yeah.
I have psychological breaks on that one as well.
Representation of autism, things like that. Yeah, basic premise-wise, I think it's important to remember for anyone who has never run Changeling the Lost before, and this is the first module that came out after the game, apart from the jumpstart. Key factors to remember are that the ritual outlined in here is not part of Lost Society by default, so that is something you can play up. Essentially, this random person comes to the Freehold and insists this works. It opens the question of how far does that NPC's reputation go? How strong is the desperation to hide from the keepers, and what will that push changelings to do? And those can be questions that are interesting to explore if your players are into it.
They do indeed have her background up in here, and it is also publicly available. It says that she is so famous that you don't need a dice roll to have heard of her name.
There are lots of rumors, though, that may or may not be true. I was going to read just the treatment piece here that we get on page 4, where it says,
Go for it.
An outsider to the Freehold called Red Wren has offered up a promise to the local Lost. With a certain ritual that she has performed elsewhere, she can ensure that no children under the age of 15 years will be abducted by the True Fae for 1 year and 1 day. The invocation of this children's contract is not pleasant, however, and forces the changelings of the Freehold into a moral dilemma. The dilemma? The ritual demands that physical harm and mental trauma be brought against a single child, acting as a scapegoat and a focus of the ritual. The fear of the sacrificial boy is the catalyst for the ritual. His fear is enough to keep all the local children sufficiently afraid of that which they do not know, the others, and the true fae at bay. So it's a very autumn court story as well. The rituals performed on the autumnal equinox. And Another kind of piece to know about is that the ritual must take place within a single evening to be effective. So you get this inherent time limit to create a sense of urgency, and adding descriptions like, you note that the sky is getting lighter. You remind players of the need to make these decisions quickly, and that opens up the risk of making them too quickly as well. So, kind of pointing to what you said, how it explores all these different dimensions of the moral quandary, it really kind of gets into those nitty-gritty spaces.
Yes, and we find that represented through the individual faces that are present for the ritual.
So only a few of them have actual character sheets and stats, the ones that the players are most likely to have a deep interaction with, whether it's antagonistic or not. And then the rest kind of get a paragraph of description, have a dice pool for a single action that they're particularly good at. They kind of follow archetypes. So, in the Autumn Court, we have Ornithine, a wizened artist who obsessively studies the hedge and is good at catching little details. It has kind of like a weird bird-like thing going on. King Ruslan, the monarch, is a lich-like elder darkling gravewight who's respected but terrifying and quite mad.
I had quite a bit of fun portraying him because he is just so deeply unsettling to look at.
Yeah. Mary O'Brien is a water-dweller ogre who collects secrets and tells elaborate lies. In the Spring Court, we have Nyx, a mirror-skin junkie pickpocket who's more caught up in pledges than she can handle. King Queen Jackie Snow, a trans snowskin and socialite whose nephew was abducted 2 months prior. I got a little bit confused. So Jackie Snow's nephew is not the kid who's at the center of the story, right? It's like a separate...
It's come time to give... Well, I enjoy this. One of my complaints about this. You never find out what happened to that kid.
Okay. All right. Spoiler.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So the kid is missing. The truth behind that is that Red Wren kidnapped him because she wanted to convince the Spring Court to go along with this. Now, the adventure tells you about this and says that the kid who will be used in the ritual is somewhere in the hedge and apparently in the same place that the other kid is. However, there is no further mention of the nephew. He never figures into the adventure at all. And at some point, I had to tell my players there is nothing about him in this adventure, so please work with me on this one.
Yeah, loose ends. The last spring courtier that we get is Satrap Shadow, a fairest muse who's an expert tempter and opportunist. In the summer court, we have Enkidu, a righteous runner-swift bully who finds the whole ritual abhorrent. King Tom of the Grotto, a woodwalker master of the forest where the ritual will take place, and he is not into that. And Gilbraith, a seething brewer who is mostly an indignant alcoholic who climbs things well for some reason. Winter Court, we have Morgana, an elemental fireheart, and it says, like, it's strange that a fireheart would be in the Winter Court, but she's made of cold flame. So she seems passionate, but is actually really callous and politically astute. Lady Miss Pity is a fairest dancer and former nurse, and an untested monarch, quite inexperienced. And Walter Splithorn, a depressed broadback beast who dabbles in the occult.
I felt sad for him.
Yeah.
The Winter Court here doesn't represent my favorite takes on them, and there were only a few characters that I liked. I think... So King Queen Jackie Snow is problematic because it's a portrayal of a trans character, but is written with no sensitivity to that subject. They'll frequently refer to Jackie Snow as he, and then put she in quotation marks.
Yeah.
It's not great, so I would recommend you just portray it with more sensitivity than the book does. And if you are reading the book, steel yourself for looking at her write-up.
Yeah. We have a couple courtless as well. There's Margrave Dorman, a quiet, wizened soldier who will exploit weaknesses in the courts at every opportunity.
My players went right for the Margrave at the beginning for somebody to chat with. I'm not sure what inspired them, but that was a character they enjoyed speaking to.
Interesting. I kind of liked the next one, Vitalia, the roller derby tunnel grub girl with undeclared loyalty and a mean streak.
They also describe the way that her body moves to reflect the tunnel grub thing, and that's some body horror.
Yep. The more significant characters that we get here are Joey Duncan, who's the kid who's the focus of the action, good at hiding and fleeing. Henry, the mute adolescent and ensorcelled human boy who stays close to Red Wren. Cobbler cormorants, hedgebird hobgoblins who can be dangerous and capricious. They have a stat block, but they're just kind of like random encounter monsters in this, right?
Later on in the adventure, your characters probably go into the hedge.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do so, there's a series of random encounters the storyteller can present to the players. These are in one of those encounters.
Yeah. And then there are a few with actual character sheets. So Red Wren, who's like the fae who's come to the Freehold with this ritual, she is an autumn woodblood elemental, former adoption worker who got turned into a tree with a little bit of birdness added in. She's described as someone for whom the moral compass has gone south and is a love 'em or hate 'em type, so people immediately form an opinion about her. Her virtue is faith, her vice is pride. I don't know that we actually want to reveal the others because they are like key antagonists in the story, but there's a few more.
I feel we should mention them at some point when their section comes up.
Well, I don't know that I want to go. Maybe it's best to just mention them now.
Okay. Then.
So the others we have are Cancer John, an autumn skitterskulk beast whose tattered flesh writhes across itself. Ew. He is weak-willed, chaotic, bitter, and kind of pitiful. His virtue is fortitude, his vice is greed.
My players absolutely loved interacting with him. Honestly, it's not just the way that he looks like a cigarette that is about to die, but also the name Cancer John.
I guess so. How do they feel about Doll, the mannequin elemental who resembles a doll?
I believe they enjoy the encounter with Doll, who is fantastically unsettling. I got marks for bringing that aspect of Doll to life, but I was also careful to show that Doll is someone who has lost so much clarity, he no longer is responsible for his actions, and there is a person beneath all the horror who is dealing with a lot of frustration, anxiety, and pain.
Yeah, they sort of present Doll as kind of a portrait of a lost on the edge of monstrosity, as like almost a cautionary tale of what one can become, especially if one is living alone in the hedge. So, should we skip the true fae at least, or should we?
I brought him up for his optional scenario, so
okay.
I will only note that there is a true fae in this adventure. He is connected with one of the other characters, and whether or not he appears is entirely optional, and the way in which he will appear seems bizarre to me, but I rolled with it, and my players found it enjoyable.
Right on. So a few other things that I wanted to kind of touch on in the structure of this adventure. There's advice on page 6 about managing dramatic tension, which I think is quite good. The emphasis is on being flexible about how and when you manage it because pacing is everything. And there's a flow diagram here that shows connections between the scenes and plots them against an arc of that tension, which I was like, that's really cool. I like that. A few of the other backstory elements that are presented. One is that children have been going missing with frightening regularity in this freehold, and most lost assume the others are to blame. There's the piece about Jackie Snow's nephew being abducted. There's the, as you mentioned, Red Wren is kind of has her reputation precedes her. And then the story optionally starts in medias res, so the ritual is already about to start. There are scenes that you can include beforehand to kind of set it up as well, but yeah, you can start right at the beginning of the action. And there are suggestions for how to get the characters specifically involved at whatever point where you start. So I liked all of that. Although some of the motivation seemed a little bit forced because they're like, oh, give the characters a patron who encourages them to get involved in the ritual for one reason or another. It's like,
this patron, they get stuck on the idea.
Yeah.
Later on in the adventure, they will mention the patron several times. I guess the point where I wish they just wrote down the character to act as a patron.
Did you have a patron when you ran it?
No, I didn't need one. I just asked the players, what's the aim of the group? And they said, we all want to get that kid to safety. And that was it.
Okay, yeah. That seems like motivation enough.
I feel like a patron is a good character to have if you or if your troop is concerned about the players being able to get in the mood and follow the direction. Maybe they're new to Changeling, maybe they don't feel confident in the politicking and direction, or they're even new to role playing in general, or maybe they're even just exhausted from working all week and they want a character who can give them perspective.
That being said, just to kind of touch again real quick on the comment that your players had about how so if I understand correctly, they would have made a different character if it turned out that the other 3 people in their group wanted to do things differently?
Yes.
Okay. I think, honestly, I guess it depends on how one presents the adventure relative to when character creation actually happens. Because I think that, not that I would ever spring this adventure on anyone because of all of the content warnings, but I think it should be one that tests existing 3-dimensional characters. Or rather, let me put it this way. I don't think one should design a character specifically to get through this scenario. Because it does hit on a lot of possible ways to break clarity and the different kinds of individual moralities of characters. Like, if you're going to tackle complex morality, really tackle it. And there's advice for, if you're going to integrate this into a larger chronicle where the characters already exist, how you can do that. And I think that allows players to, I guess, feel their way into how their characters would react more naturalistically. And it lets storytellers adjust the framing of the ritual. Like, there's one suggestion where it's like, maybe this ritual is actually already tradition in the Freehold. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear about how you ran it as a standalone, because I think I would actually, if I were to run it, I would try to integrate it into an existing chronicle. So the contrast there, I think, very much impacts how dealing with the moral issues shakes out. Something like that.
So, could you summarize the question that you have about the approach that I used?
Well, I guess it's, if you were to, the question I guess would be, instead of running this as a one-shot, if you were going to integrate this as a standalone-ish story within a larger chronicle, how would you change things? And in particular, how do you think characters would get integrated into the action?
Oh, sure. So I would first off look at our existing safety tools, because if somebody had marked off something against children, I would leave that off entirely and just not run the adventure in the first place.
Yeah.
If the topic didn't come up at all in the scenario, I would say to my players, hey everyone, I'm interested in running a scenario that I found. A key component of it is child endangerment. Does anybody have any concerns about that as a theme? And again, if they said, yes, we do, then I would shelf it. And if they said, no, we don't, then I would just run the adventure as is for their characters. But I would need to decide whether it's more interesting for Red Ren to have an existing relationship with the Freehold. I think it's too modular for me to give you one set of answers. To take my Freehold, for example, that I currently use, all of the monarchs and many of the changelings are all on the same side, ultimately, even if they disagree on things. And there are characters who might do something clandestine, such as what happens in this adventure, but the court would be shocked if that was ever brought up, to say nothing of getting them all to agree to participate in this odious ritual. So I would probably have it as the suggestion of making it something on the down low in this scenario, where maybe your group got invited, wrongly assuming that they'd all be 100% chill with this. Maybe somebody tried to rope the characters into doing this. Maybe their monarch sent them off to look into the matter itself. Or, heck, I could even take joy if I, as the game line suggests, had a pre-existing character and have them fit it. If there's some character that the players like, a kid character in my game, then I might put them in that seat. Even then, the characters I use would have different reactions. I know one of the kid characters who would likely have fought back, escaped, ran through the hedge, and found her way back home and then told everybody. I have another character who would have been like, gee, I don't know who these strangers are, but they seem like they're acting nice, and gone along with it. And the PCs would be like, oh yeah, we know that character would do that. Now let's get them out of danger and chastise them later for the matter. To the book's credit, it gives me a ton of ideas on how I could integrate this into an ongoing adventure. And it's one of the things I love about it.
Yeah, my hesitation, I think I've probably mentioned before, certainly I mentioned on the podcast before, I don't know if we've talked about it, but I ran a game that there was a moment where it was rescuing a child from a dangerous situation, and it did trigger a player who didn't expect to be triggered by it, but they talked to me afterwards and said, this was actually really hard for me, and I don't know if I can continue in the game. And it was a good learning experience for me as a storyteller because we figured out together a way to address that moment and still keep them in the chronicle and move past it. But it made me more aware of how sensitive a topic that was for people, even if they don't think it will be. So building an entire story around that is probably more than I would want to chance for my own table. But structurally, if I found myself in a situation where I could do that, whether it was like you did, a new group with a one shot where it was very clear about everything involved, I think it does cover all of those bases really well. It really tries to hit as many gray areas as possible. That doesn't mean it's perfect, and there's certainly things that could be tuned up, but the packaging around the idea, I would agree, is very robust.
It is, in fact, so robust that it becomes confusing.
Well,
please proceed with the scenes and I'll tell you something, but when do you want to hear about the characters they played? We had an interesting setup.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I don't actually want to give away what the scenes specifically contain, but I think what I want to say about them is that, well, there's 8 total plus the 2 prologues. They don't have to go linearly, but there is kind of a flow to it, like a recommended sort of progression, I would say. And it's difficult to thread that needle of get the plot where it needs to go while not making players feel like they can't impact the action.
They make a good effort at having the scenes interact with each other, and they give suggestions on how to run this as something in a single session. You can break this down to only 3 scenes, or it could go for 8.
Yeah. And structurally, each one has a rating for the mental, social, physical challenge difficulty, a description with some narrative readout text that you can deploy, storyteller goals versus character goals, and actions the characters can take, one or more of which gets a more in-depth treatment. So, for example, in the starting necessary scene, the start of the ritual, there's guidance for how to handle if the players decide to canvass the crowd. You get the dice pools they might roll, the obstacles or assets that can provide modifiers, what failure and success look like. So each of those scenes individually, I think, was set up really well. And then at the end, we do get, again, as we saw in Goblin Markets, those scene cards. So you have like the little abridged version. I have kind of noteworthy moments that I want to point to, but I'm curious to hear about your players and their characters and their experience going through it.
Very good, then. We have talked about a lot of books on this podcast, and it led to an interesting surprise. I told the players you can use whatever Changeling first edition material that you want. I wound up with 2 Autumn courtiers, and keep in mind, Autumn is the one that is
right. They're
ostensibly backing this ritual.
They're all in.
And 2 Dusk courtiers.
So that's all right. I don't think we actually said yet, but it does give court opinions overall on the ritual, where for Autumn it's like, yeah, they're like, this is a necessary evil and we have to go for it. Winter, it's kind of like it's probably not necessary and maybe not a great idea. Spring is kind of reluctant and Summer's totally against it. So Dusk, I'm curious how that aligns with what's presented here.
I think they went with the idea that it's a warning sign, the fact that you have dusk courtiers becoming active. To say nothing of having two of them means that something is very wrong here and that it needs to be addressed. Their mere presence says that.
I like that.
And in their mind, well, dusk courtiers are also heroic, so they're like, yeah, this is the obvious best one to go for rescuing this kid. Even if we resign ourselves to the idea that this freehold is terrible, we still have good that we can do here when nobody else is willing to stand up. That is very Dusk Court to me, and I think that's what inspired the players.
Interesting. Were there any noteworthy moments or aspects of individual scenes that you want to call out? No spoilers, though.
Oh, I won't spoil anything. I promise you. So, things that I found good about the scenarios, I will tell you when I get to the right page. While I'm getting there, first, a thing I forgot to say. You went through a lot of characters now, didn't you?
I did.
I tried to briefly describe them, and my players were lost, because that is a lot of people.
Yeah.
I highly recommend that if you ever run this adventure, you should write out a summary of what all of these characters are beforehand, so the players can look at that and refer back to that during the game session. Otherwise, they are probably going to get confused, and you lose some of the emotional tenor that comes out of these conflicting personalities playing off each other and maybe being manipulated by the player characters. As for the adventure itself, the preludes are just about getting to the ritual site, and I think the first roll I called for was Wits plus Socialize, and that made one of the players wake up and say, "This is definitely the adventure for me." They're good. A brief walk in the woods where nothing special happens, other than maybe you skin your knee during a hiking incident. I'm amused they gave that its own section.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like,
it's one of the beauties of the SAS. Literally every role is bespoke.
Oh my.
Okay, and then there's a prologue around the ritual space, and I think you should do both of these if you have time, because the first one lets you get meditative about the scene, and the second one lets you explore those personalities. Another thing I like about this is that the SAS gives us character goals for every section and consequences to look at depending upon how things went. That is hugely useful if you're lost in the sauce and don't remember what the purpose of the current scene was.
I will point out, in Rosebride's Plight, it's a separate section all its own, and here it's kind of like buried under particular choices. So I think I liked it better in Rosebride's Plight, the way they handled it.
The way they handled which part?
The consequences.
I see.
The scene of the ritual itself at the start, I enjoyed how, with all of its content warning intensity, it really is broken down step by individual step. So storyteller and players alike have a lot of opportunity to make it unfold in a way specific to their table, which is good.
And my players did. They took a route I did not expect and just tried to shout down the entire ritual as it was occurring. When Ren used a contract, try scaring them into silence, one of them hit back with the contracts of entropy and inflicted babble upon her. So she was useless for the rest of the scenario. Just instant shutdown. It was incredible.
Okay. So, without giving away what happens in the middle of the ritual that interrupts it, there is also a scene where you interact with all of those storyteller characters. And despite there being many, possibly a confusing number of them, I did really like how you got to see the personalities of all of them and their reactions. It's like, okay, if you approach this one, here's a few lines about things they might say, ways they might behave, and their reactions to all of the kind of little twists and turns. I was like, yeah, I like that.
I felt the same thing coming over me as I was reading this adventure. I was very tense until I got to this section, and it helped me get into the mood for the adventure. It's rare that I read a adventure that gets me excited.
Right on. So maybe it's a slight spoiler to say, but it's true that there is some traipsing into the hedge with this one. I don't know that it was really necessary to add like hedge distractions, but I suppose as complications go, they're fine as long as they keep the action moving.
There is a part of the adventure where you're doing some tracking, and it's an extended action. The best way to handle these is to intersperse them after rolls, but before they get to the total number of successes required. For my party, we decided to ixnay them because we were already running long on time.
Yeah. There's a scene after that, and then the scene following it, which I would say is maybe like one of the major climaxes against one of the antagonists. I liked how it did kind of break it down. You get the social approach, the physical approach, and the mental approach. And there's different ways that you can try to solve the situation that you're in with various consequences. So, yeah, that was cool.
Yes, I appreciated it. There's a lot of times when players will get confused or lost during an adventure.
They're all lost.
Well, when that happens, I recommend that you look at this for guidance. You could even send it to them if the section doesn't need to be redacted.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, once you get to like the final scene and whether or not you succeed in your goal or not, there are some good suggestions for the consequences of the aftermath, which again helps you integrate the story into a larger chronicle. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's well constructed for sure. I think it's well written. It's just kind of, you got to be ready for some heavy subject matter. It feels like a story that is trying to hold its cast accountable to their actions, both player characters and storyteller characters. And I mean, it's a 40 odd page module. So it's like there's only so much depth you can get into all of the moral quandaries with this. For what it is though, I think it does an ENnie-able job because I think it won an ENnie, right?
That sounds familiar, but I don't recall for sure.
Hmm.
A lot of my notes on this adventure are, wow, this is a fantastic way of doing this, or they did a great job presenting this, or wow, I've never seen this with such clarity presented in a game. All the scenes worked out.
Hmm.
I don't want to spoil that part. So, at the end of things, I feel like you have to go with the idea that if it's a one shot that we've just gotten here with the Red Wren situation and now you're stuck having to solve it. I think that if you prepare for that, it'll be a lot easier to make characters for this one. Overall, I really enjoyed running this adventure, and everybody who participated enjoyed playing in it.
There you go. So after all of that, we have another adventure, which is The Rose Bride's Plight. And this one is by Jess Hartley, intended for characters from 35 to 74 XP. The front label says physical challenges at 2 dots, mental and social at 4, so maybe more deduction and politicking than fighting.
I missed the part about them saying you should have this much XP for the adventure. I had everybody start at base except for one player who was in the previous one who had 8 XP.
And that made all the difference.
Yeah, sure.
So were there content warnings for this one?
The special ones for this were poison and trapped in pledges. One of the themes revolves around pledges and a risk that player characters might get wrapped up in pledges. The consequences of this run along the same lines of the storyteller is forcing the player to act in a specific way. Classic example would be a vampire that's dominating your mind. So if you have players who are turned off by losing control over the characters or something stymieing them from doing something they would normally do, this is a highly important topic to talk about. In my game, though, the players just said, yes, interest, we're all about. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. And I'll also point out that because this actually came out before Dancers in the Dusk, we get the Unwitting Pledges system from that book in here. So this is like
Is it exactly the same?
I didn't check, but I assume so. Like, why would they redo all that work? But yeah, maybe we can do a study or something. So I was going to read the beginning of the treatment that we get here on page, well, it's 58 in the compilation. Who knows what it is in the original. But in the Rose Bride's Plight, the spring and winter courts of the local freehold have been at odds for decades. The current monarchs, at the strong suggestion of the other courts, have devised a plan to mend their past and forge a new future together. Queen Aeolian, longtime verdant sovereign, and King Maxwell Warden, ancient Onyx monarch, have agreed to the marriage of their wards and the heirs to their respective thrones. The engaged couple, Aurora of the Spring Court and Todd White of Winter, are scheduled to wed in a small private ceremony on the vernal equinox 3 days hence. Tonight, at a party hosted by Queen Aeolian, the happy couple celebrates their upcoming nuptials with the freehold and guests from both far and near. But tragedy will mar the celebration, throwing those gathered into chaos and turmoil. Recruited by the locals to help prevent the freehold from falling into civil war, the changelings must dig deep into the interpersonal and political web of the freehold to determine the truth of the situation. The investigation must be done quickly. The equinox is only 3 days away, and with it comes the potential for great joy or tragedy depending on what the characters uncover and the choices they make. This had a little bit of the saying the same thing multiple times issue, because like they keep mentioning that the equinox is only 3 days away, and I'm like, I get it. Yes, there's a time limit.
I did not tell my players what would be happening. I just said your characters will be going to this ball, and here's the wedding that is planned, and you can expect something to go wrong. And I left it at that.
I think that's sensible. And did you find, so the last one was kind of an upfront moral quandary story. This one, because it is grounded in that concept of pledges, and in particular the Heart's Oath pledge that forms the center of this political marriage of convenience, it is more aspects that are kind of like, it highlights aspects of the world of the lost. There are moral quandaries and emotional stakes buried underneath that, but it can also just kind of function to help players learn more about what pledges mean and why they're important. And it's a little more intricate than just child endangerment, yes, no. So, having run this one too, did you feel that the scenes lent themselves to moral exploration, or did you feel like you had to build that in if that's something you chose to do?
I do not think that the player characters themselves felt like they were going through a moral quandary. Rather, they just wanted to do the best thing they could do in this situation. And when they had an opportunity to do the best possible thing, they said, we're going to do it, and we're going to combine it with this trick, and fuck the consequences.
That's an approach. We're also told here that the theme is conflicted loyalties, a topic that the Lost must often tread lightly around because they navigate freehold politics and pledges alongside just emotions and relationships. And then the mood is confusion. Nothing is what it seems. This is a story about discovering hidden depths, and even though this is for, in theory, slightly more advanced characters, I think it does work for introductory stories as well, for new players to underscore those elements of the game. Even if it's not officially a quick start, it has those vibes. And as with Fearmaker's Promise, it can be a standalone session or part of a larger chronicle, and there are more of those motivations suggested if you need to push your players more into the action. Although I don't think we have patrons quite so foregrounded.
Didn't come up from my group.
There is also, I like this sidebar on page 59 of the combined PDF where it's like, yeah, you can run this with just the core book, but if you want to bring stuff in from other books, here's some elements. And then they actually give like citations, which is good.
Since we're talking about references to other books, it's worth noting that both the Fearmaker's Promise and the Rose Bride's Plight are, one, before I forget it, the titles are meant for a theme, and second, entitlements come up a lot in these adventures. They're typically an aside, but the fact that the book kept them in was fascinating to me. It said something about changeling culture.
Maybe they understood that players would gravitate towards trying to get those. So kind of giving examples, like I think Todd White, it says at some point he's on his way to becoming a Duke of the Icebound Heart.
Yeah, he is.
So a few things to bear in mind again if you're running this story. I like how the reason for the long-standing tension between spring and winter in this freehold is never explained, so you can adjust it to fit your existing chronicle. And that's not an oversight. They specifically say, we have left this open for you. So good on them.
I'll name one thing that might be an oversight. How to say this in a non-spoilery way. One of the characters is highly motivated to make sure that nothing goes wrong with these
Mm.
wedding plans. They explain why he feels that way, and it is very difficult for me to find the citation that explains how he wound up in this situation. And it's so big that I was frustrated at times trying to read it. It would say, this character does this because of this reason. And I think, what is the consequence of them failing? I'm not clear on that.
I'm not going to spoil it either, but I think I know who you're talking about, and I thought I had an answer, and now I'm second guessing myself. So we're going to have a conversation about that later.
Okay.
The other thing is that the emphasis on oaths and pledges means that if you are going to integrate this into a longer game, that gives you a lot of room to truly explore the repercussions of character choices. There is a non-zero chance that characters will end up in a pledge that they either didn't agree to or didn't expect to go as they thought it would before the end of this story. So that's something which, I mean, in a one shot, it's, yeah, who cares? You know, I'm not going to continue the game. But that gives you a lot of foundation for further things to explore, which I liked.
Speaking of exploring such things and the potential to do that, I will say without context, for the sake of spoilers, that one of the PCs wound up replacing one of the marriage partners and getting married in the final scene.
And not in the fun way, like with the Tikbalang.
Oh, it was fun for them because we did an epilogue afterwards, and I said, well, what do you do with this? And the player said, well, my character now wields fantastic power and uses that for his personal agendas and
Oh, all right.
does not mind what the other partner winds up doing because the player character had taken control and the person to whom they were married seemed like a character who would not care.
All right. Well, that's called making the most out of a situation.
It was not how I expected the adventure to end.
Groovy. There's not as much here about the arc of dramatic tension or the backstory even beyond what's in the treatment as compared with Fearmaker's Promise, at least. Like there is still a significant amount, but really it's just spring and winter have been at each other's throats for 30 years, and this marriage is a last-ditch effort rooted in oaths to make things right. So the betrothed are the delicate and beautiful ward of the Spring Queen and the somewhat callous predatory one of the Winter King. So where it does differ significantly from Fearmaker's Promise, I would say, is in how it treats its minor characters, and I do quite like it. Each one has a full page with background information, a notable action that they can perform, often with a bonus, and I think some of these might be like expressions of Kith blessings, and then in-character quotes about their opinions on several other characters. So overall, I liked this approach better than the random paragraph of description that we just saw in the last one.
I like it too. I think the Fearmaker's Promise can get away without it because
Yeah.
many of those characters will matter for exactly one scene if you really want to get into it, and it's only an option. Whereas by contrast, in this adventure, almost any of these characters could be important depending upon the actions of the players, and the political drama that plays out needs this kind of extra detail.
That being said, I think there are ones that are more likely to matter a lot more than others. They provide the one-liners here, so I thought I might just go through and throw those out there.
Sure.
So we have Aeolian, the oath-wielding queen, where it says the potential for stormy weather always exists in her silver tousled locks and sky blue eyes. She is elemental air-touched, spring queen, mentor of Aurora, adversary of Maxwell Warden.
Worth noting, they do not use any original art in this book, I think,
Yeah.
except for the cover. And they did not have any art pieces for most of the characters in the Fearmaker's Promise. For the Rosebride's Plight, they scoured the other books and made little icon photos for them, which I think is cute.
Yeah. We have Jeremiah Solm, voyeuristic dream doctor. Stars as thick and bright as the Milky Way dance along his night black skin. He is a fairest bright one, Spring Court, motley mate of Aurora, Madam Night, and Squick. Aurora, blushing bride. Fresh with the blush of youth, her skin is as pale as a lily, and her hair adorned at all times with still growing roses. And she actually doesn't have the court information and stuff, but she is a fairest flowering of the Spring Court.
Another thing worth noting is that at the bottom of every character profile, they explain their opinions of other characters, and only the ones that matter to them. They're great insights into how the characters are connected, and also how that character thinks.
Yeah. We have Balor, the jealous bully. As ugly as he is ill-tempered, this one-eyed bruiser is a monster and more than just name. He is an ogre cyclopean, Summer Court, rival of Micah the Tall and Todd White for Aurora's attention.
Couple thoughts here. The difference between Balor and Micah feels like the difference in court for trolls in Dreaming.
Yeah, I could see that. This being the unseelie one.
Yes, I also did use him because the adventure begins with a party, and I say, "Where are your characters?" One player says, "Oh, my character is going to be socializing." Another one said, "Well, my character's like handles catering and house stuff, is like a magistrate of the Wax Mask, but doesn't have that entitlement yet. So he's like in the back of the house." And the third player said, "My character is getting ready for putting on a show, and it's going to take a while because drag takes a while." And I'm like, okay, cool. So I have like one player character at the party with all the characters. What am I going to do about the rest of these? I had Balor show up and start shouting and knocking loudly on doors in order to attract the attention of the two PCs who were in the back. Balor is a terrible person, but if you need somebody to act with anger or irrationality to mess things up, put him in the scene.
Perfect. He's also good at ferreting out info.
Yeah, Cyclopean.
We then have Squick, the boogeyman. All knees and elbows, he moves like his joints are too loose, and when he smiles to reassure you, his lopsided grin stretches way too far across a face the color of burlap sack. He is a darkling mirror skin of the Autumn Court, motley mate of Aurora, Jeremiah Psalm, and Madam Night.
They never say this, but it's pretty clear that he is a member of the Scarecrow Ministry. There's like 2 references to the burlap sack.
Next up is Madam Night, disdainful seer. Bone thin, with fingers that flex and skitter like roaches fleeing the light. No wonder she's often mistaken for a darkling. She is a wizened oracle, in fact, of the Autumn Court, motley made of Aurora, Jeremiah Song, and Squick.
I just realized the game missed an opportunity. When they talk about how you might do things, there are 3 members of the motley with Aurora, who's one of the primary characters. You could theoretically just play the 3 of them.
Theoretically. Then there's Maxwell Warden, a most proper king. As stiff and slender as an icicle, this white-haired monarch glowers at the world over the top of his frost-rimmed glasses, even though his art has no glasses. Whatever. Maxwell is a wizened chatelaine, winter king, mentor of Todd White, adversary of Aeolian. And who is this Todd White? Well, he is the ice-hearted groom-to-be. Sleek silver-white hair pulled back in a loose ponytail without a single strand out of place. His eyes are blue ice, but his smile could melt the heart of any woman. Beast Hunter Heart, Winter Court, heir to the Onyx Throne, fiancé of Aurora, rival of Balor, and Micah the Tall for Aurora's attention.
He's a complete jackass, and I loved every second that I got to play as him.
Foxboy Jerk Dick Bag. And Tai, Stealthy Killer. Her visage and voice are carefully cultivated not to draw attention. Only her sheer ordinariness is truly of note. Beast Venom Bite, Winter Court.
I love that they went all in, and they say that she min-maxed for her abilities. They say she can only do one thing, that one thing very well. And that one thing is getting an ambush off on somebody, making sure that she has maximum initiative, and then doing a roguelike sneak attack to either kill them immediately or infect them with a poison that kills them thereafter.
And then a speedy getaway.
Yeah, they show us the contracts. They show us the math. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Last of these minor ones is Flit, Nosy Information Broker. Perhaps it's all the facets in her eyes or the constant twitch of her antennae, but this butterfly girl always seems alert to whatever it is others most want ignored. A beast windwalker, courtless spy. So then there are a few that get a bit more information because they are, again, likely to have more in-depth scenes with the characters where extended roleplay would be relevant. There's Parsimon, the hermit farmer. Maybe once he was a vital growing thing, now he's like an old root, dry, gnarled, and good only for tripping up those who don't watch their way. He's a wizened woodwalker, autumn court, hermit. And these they give virtues and vices. His virtue is charity, his vice is wrath. There might be a true fae in the mix. I don't want to give more details than that.
I did not use the true fae when I ran this. She shows up under, like, very specific circumstances.
Yeah. And then Micah the Tall. As tall and unrelenting as a pillar of stone, he manages not to bend, even under the burden of his own self-righteousness. He is an ogre gargantuan, summer court, beloved to Aurora, rival of Balor and Todd White for Aurora's attentions. Virtue justice, vice is pride.
Also one of my favorite characters.
Yay. So they're solid. They have more meat on their bones, certainly, than in the last scenario.
Not only that, there is enough here that I could run an entire adventure around them.
Mm-hmm. And the scenes, because that follows hard on the heels here, I would say that these are more loosely structured than Fearmaker's Promise. Like, that one had some flexibility, but then we get this whole web diagram where it really allows for lots of permutation. So, like, you can go from point A to B or C or D, and then from point B to C or D or F, and then from C to F or H, and so on. One consequence of that is in the scene write-ups themselves, there's a lot of, if the players have already done this, then this. If they have not yet done this, then that. Some of the paths feel more natural to me, but when you were putting this together, how did you find that flow? Did you feel that you had to, like, force things in a direction at any point?
No, it went very smoothly. In fact, there were times when they would leave one of the scene spaces to another one and then wind up coming back to it or doing something that integrated something from that previous scene into this. And that information was easy to find for the most part. There was an issue where, for example, I want to know, hey, where do you have the thing about they talk with Parsimon? It was buried in a scene that doesn't have his name at the top. And that might have been neat if they had, like, primary actors you would find in these scenes. Despite the great length and having the possibility of doing 20 scenes, I found little difficulty in it. It really was a really well put together little product.
Structurally, they're similar to Fearmaker's Promise in that they open with the mental, physical, social dot breakdown. They have the overview and narrative description, storyteller versus character goals, suggested actions, some of which get extra treatment. Two new things in here are the descriptions have additional bits at the end for low clarity characters to emphasize their somewhat askew perceptions, and then a separate consequences section where it really breaks it out and gets into what characters might learn or gain, how their choices might carry forward into future scenes. Both of which I think were smart changes compared to the last one. Again, I don't think we should spoil the scenes themselves, but standout moments for me, I think the three that I have in my notes here, the descriptions of the Spring Queen Aeolian as being more like the first storm of spring rather than the beautiful blooms and everything. Like, she still has a lot of winteriness about her. So that was well described.
A scene in which the player characters had to negotiate with her, who is a master at negotiating, was one of the most tense scenes in the session.
Because you've got those unwitting pledges hanging over your head. Yeah. Then these sidebars that kind of collect rumors, and when you dig for information, they have kind of different levels of success can yield different pieces of information. Essentially, the whole mystery of the scenario is discoverable from these roles and interactions. But the players, depending how it goes, they may not get all the pieces, and regardless of how much they learn, there's still the challenge of how to use that information to resolve the political crisis. So I liked how that was kind of woven through different scenes. Like, in this one, you might discover X, Y, and Z, but not all of it. And in this scene, you might discover A, B, and C, but not all of it. how do you put those pieces together into something workable to resolve the situation? And then lastly, there were a whole bunch of little Easter eggs of like literature and folklore inspiration. I was like,
Really?
yes. Yeah.
Could you give me an example? Other than the obvious, very big one that's thematically at the central of the adventure.
I mean, that's the big obvious one. But like there's a scene where you are looking in one of the characters' rooms and it's like, here are 5 or 6 books that you turn up, and it's like they're all related in some way to the actions of that character.
It was so on the nose that I thought the players would just pick it up immediately.
And yet
it was good. They got an idea of what was going on, and that led them to do more things and ultimately figure things out. There is one thing I want to call out. I'll give this without context.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, specialties in Chronicles of Darkness give +1 die. The maximum penalty something can have, at least from one obstacle, is a -5. There is an item in this adventure that says your character needs to roll intelligence plus occult at a -6.
Yeah.
It gets worse. You can reduce it to a -4 with specialties, which, as I said before, is not how specialties work. And even if you pass that initial test, that only lets you know the name of this item. You have to pass another test of the same difficulty to understand what it does. If they're going that far, just say they can figure it out.
Yeah. I assume they did that because if you do get that information, it does, it's like the missed part. And you're like, oh, okay, that's what happened. Like it does reveal a big chunk of the story. But kind of like what I was just pointing to, that doesn't necessarily help you resolve the main conflict that things are leading to. It's like, okay, you've got that information. Great. Now what? So yeah, I think maybe they kind of overcompensated with that. And it does also feel like to me, like all of the scenes feel like set up for the final one, where every choice and every consequence coalesces in that final scene, the vow. And while that's good from a narrative point of view, because you are bringing everything together, I do wonder if there's enough in these scenes to truly allow a storyteller to explore all the consequences. So, like, for example, we're told at one point that a key character isn't particularly strong in a fight, which suggests, hey, maybe the characters can fight their way out of this moment. But then we don't get that character's actual stats. Another ending has the possibility of crafting an emergency pledge as one way to get out of things. But as I think I noted when we came up with unwitting pledges before, not all players have equal facility for doing that very easily. So even if it's sometimes necessary, I think it's good to avoid winging it at the climax whenever possible. So, and something on top of that I noticed is in that final climactic scene, because there's lots of possible outcomes to this scenario, but there were a few little twists that felt a little bit like gotcha moments at the players. Like, there are definitely endings where you win and endings where you lose, and the players don't always have control over how their choices will lead to one or the other. So it's like they've gone through all these investigations, they've come up with a plan, they've enacted it, they've role played through that final confrontational scene, and then surprise, something happens that completely undoes everything. And that just feels,
Without spoiling what that actually is, I am going to mention that there is another content warning for this one. Suicide.
Yeah. Self-harm in general. I think it's easy enough to excise that piece from when it happens. And I would actually probably do that as a storyteller. I'm like, rather than cheapen the moment where that might happen after the players have put in all that effort, just change it as a storyteller. There's no reason for it to be in there except for the obvious thematic connection.
There's a thing about playing into the horrors of the pledges that does add bite to those gotchas. I can see some groups wanting that to emphasize the tragedy of what can occur in these circumstances. I'm happy that they got a happy ending in my version of it.
As they should. So at the end, we get notes on the possible aftermath, as with Fearmaker's Promise, and how this might feed into the broader chronicle. We get the scene cards and some character cards. Overall, I'll say it's an engaging story. largely what comes out of it is be careful what you swear to, because chances are you haven't thought it through nearly as much as the person who's getting you to swear, and getting out of those pledges will require a lot of twisting. Structurally, I think, kind of pointing to you saying having the characters listed at the top of the scene, yeah, I had in my notes too, having the info separate like that means you'll be doing a lot of back and forth. My thought was to just print them separately or print out those character cards and like add notes. And I felt like the motivations that the players would have, you kind of have to play that up, because there were a few moments when I thought, well, if I were a player, why would I care about this particular moment? Especially for, I think Winter Court characters have the least to lose in this scenario. I don't know. What did your players choose to play for this one?
Oh gosh. One player was going to be a summer fairest dragon, and I play with them a lot, and I suggested to him, what if your character was spring? I could see doing something special with that. If you take that, I won't spoil what it is. That is the one.
Yeah. It's like, I see where this is going.
That was amazing. What else do we have? We had, I believe, an Autumn Courtier Glass Elemental, who were both adventures because the player was in both, made fantastic use out of shattered glass. What with element glass, it was horrifying and wonderful.
And there is a key moment where lots of glass shatters in the story.
So. There is, and they said, "Hey, you said a lot of glass shattered, right?"
Excellent.
That was their moment. The third one, I remember the player, but I am blinking on what they played. No Dust Courtiers this time.
Yeah, for the best. So overall, which one do you think was more fun for yourself and or the group?
Certainly the Rose Bride's Plight was more fun. It showed how changelings can be politically engaging and how the conflicts they enter can be so divorced from ordinary struggles while still feeling human and touching. This is ultimately about a wedding that has a lot of complicated feelings in it and obligations. And I loved every moment of it. We mix in everything from sleuthing to politicking to even a battle to first blood at one point.
Gasp.
And we got it all done in one marathon session. Truly fantastic. The other one is good, but this one feels like it could be dropped in the middle of one of my existing games or be the foundation for a completely new setting that I use. Heck, one of the players even said that he would love to reprise his character in another game. That's shocking to me because this is a one shot. I don't expect people to get invested in their characters. I love it when they do, but a lot of people just don't feel that from this kind of thing. So the fact that it happened was really quite amazing to me. And maybe even more amazing is the fact that I did like both of these adventures. I rarely say that about adventures. At best, most of them I find functional ways of getting a group together for a night to get an idea of whether we love the system, but these two, and especially the Rose Bride, are gonna stick with me.
Right on. I obviously have not run either one, and like I said, I'd be more likely to run the Rose Bride's Plight, but I can appreciate both for doing different things and highlighting different aspects that are things I do want to explore in my games. So if I didn't run these as they are, I certainly see things I could pull out and incorporate into other stories for sure. The last bit of this compilation that we get is Personae, which again was released separately online and is just 5 sample characters in a motley.
I had so much fun with the previous section that I felt like I'd finished my dessert, was getting up from the table, and then the waiter comes in with the bill.
Oh no.
Did not like this section.
Yeah, I mean, it just is kind of tacked on, and the story of the motley is very thin. It's like, oh, they were all kind of outcasts from their various courts, and they decided to form a motley. It's like, all right, well, that's great. Going very briefly through them, we have Romeo, a darkling mirror skin of the Spring Court, whose concept is desperate Casanova, and is a little bit gross. There's Aslan, who is a confident bully, a summer beast hunter heart.
A lot of bullies from the summer court, I'm noticing.
Yeah, what's up with that? Can't imagine.
Aslan does require a content warning from his background.
Yeah, he's kind of a...
He, as the book puts it, as a young man, you used your large size and fierce temper to get your way. Whether it was bullying classmates into doing your homework or, quote, encouraging unquote sexual favors from your dates, you never hesitated to use whatever tools were at your disposal to intimidate others into doing what you wanted. That is gross. I do not think they should have put that in as a ready-made player character.
Yeah, particularly since he seems to be continuing the trend.
Yes, he has not learned his lesson. He just gained superpowers.
Yeah. Anyway, after him we get Caradwen, who is a autumn wizened Kirigan, a lore keeper and medic. The Hunchback, no other name, who put the motley together. He is the quiet conservator, ogre farwalker of the Winter Court. And lastly, Nicola, who was my favorite, is the elemental snowskin courtless, who is a cool manipulator. And I do like how each of them has two character sheets, where one is more advanced, like they have 30-ish XP, so there's a few more dots on the sheet. So the latter part of the book suggests using these as the characters for either of the two adventures. Fearmaker's Promise, presumably, would be the 0 XP characters, and Rosebride's Plight for the seasoned ones.
They give a lot of information about what to do with them, but I don't recall if they said anything about how to integrate them with those adventures.
Not really, just suggesting dropping them in, I think.
Oh, this is the one piece of the book other than the cover that has original artwork.
Yes, the best of which is Nicola's art.
Oh yeah, Nicola's art is so cool. I love the elemental.
She's just across the board the best. There's some notes at the end about kind of like how you can manage the motley as a storyteller, what to do if you need to take people out or add people in, depending on your group size, making adjustments to the sheet if you want to give them contracts that are from books other than the core book. Things that I do like at the very end here are suggesting connections for each of them at their pre-durance, during durance, and post-durance. So I like that as an exercise for character building, like to get people thinking about, whether you want to call them mortal touchstones or whatever. Those are some good options to generate. And then they each get a few individual story hooks in case you want to spin one of them off into a solo adventure or take one of these characters and put them in a different motley, which again, I think is sensible. So yeah, the characters themselves, with the exception of Nicola, I was like, about most of them. But the approach to providing characters and working with them, I was like, yeah, that's nice.
I think that is useful, but I don't think I have anything other to say other than my only note for Nicola was, oh, she's a badass.
And that hair and that coat, totally cool.
Head spun raiments.
Yep. And I think that's about it. We didn't actually talk about the back cover, but it really is just those three things stuck together. Any final...
Yeah, so final thoughts. I don't even say I would play the game. I have run the game. I'm glad that I ran these adventures. I think this is definitely worth picking up for a storyteller who is new to Lost and looking for an angle that will get them in or be a campaign opener. They can also be used by a more experienced storyteller who is looking for ways of refining their approach with pairing stories, or just seeing the perspective of someone else who is involved with the game's development. I can certainly mine ideas from here on how to play Changeling the Lost for myself. The only part that I think is truly useless is it's the NPCs at the back of the book, the ready-made player characters. I mean, it's nice to have a sheet to give to players, but I would rather just point them at the free demo and say, take those.
Or the NPCs in the two adventures for this book that don't get much use. Like you were talking about using the motley and Rosebride's Plight as the character.
Oh, yes. The motley. They would be great. They should have been written up for player character options. It would have been a super easy way to drag somebody into the adventure, and they have a pre-existing reason to care about what's going to happen.
How about that? For my part, I don't think I really have anything else much to add. It is, though, I think these are the only proper adventures, Quick Start notwithstanding, that we got for first edition. So,
would you run either of these?
I can't imagine running Fearmaker's Promise except under very specific circumstances. Rosebride's Plight, I certainly could see myself running, but I also would probably not use the motley in the back.
Well, then, I think we have said all there is to say. What is our next book?
Next up will be Victorian Lost, the final book for first edition, which is also kind of a bridge book between modern and historical. First edition, second edition, White Wolf, Onyx Path, long book, short book, lots of liminal stuff. So I'm looking forward to that.
I haven't read it before, so I am doubly excited.
Excitement!
Yes.
Well, until then, if you would like to talk to us about Changeling the Lost elsewhere, your options include Discord at discord.me/ctp, sending an email to podcast@changelingthepodcast.com, looking up Changeling the Podcast on Facebook or YouTube, sending a toot on Mastodon at dice.camp@changelingpod, and you can always support our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Links to all of these will be in the show notes. Until next time, I have been Puka.
And I'm Fetch, telling you to remember to be really good at politicking because you never know when you need a changeling on your side.
The only thing we have to fear is fierce elf. Reading through the Rosebride's Plight left us wondering, what about the troubles faced by other florally themed relations? After a subsequent investigation, we have a slightly better sense of the anthology, so to speak. The Lily Groom's puzzle features dastardly swordplay and smoke-shrouded intrigues, while the lover's passionate plea scene in the Orchid Partner's Crisis engenders some of the most emotionally meaningful roleplay a gamer may ever experience. Not all of this hardship bouquet have equally interesting stories, though. The Begonia Divorcee's Dilemma has little going for it except one climactic battle with a sentient patch of hedge mud, and the Chrysanthemum Fuckbuddy's predicament is a downright yawner. Nevertheless, we shall continue to explore this garden of narrative delights and report back when we find a selection worthy of sharing. In the meantime, these expeditions of Stem and Petal are supported by our patrons, who get a shout-out like so at the end of each episode. Bad Company, Ben the Canadian, Siglosson Jr., Derek, Dorcas, Ellerus, Henry Kraft, Ia Bull, Oreo, Raskaboos, Sanchiger, Sija, the crew of Erebus, and Ware Buffalo. If you too would like to be name-dropped with our severe levels of thanks, check out www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast to sign up. We also welcome reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or walking up to random strangers on the street and saying, "Changeling the Podcast," in a spoopy voice. Whatever suits you, always be the only maker of your own fear, and not too much of it, for we instead believe first and foremost in wonder, encouraging you to let its power carry you onwards as you keep on dreaming.